So you've probably seen this in your Spotify settings, maybe on your phone or your laptop. If you have a sound system, you'll definitely have run into this before, the dreaded and confusing EQ. And on many devices, there are presets, which are usually based on genre, which raises a lot of questions, right? Should I just listen to jazz on the jazz setting? Should I make my own adjustments on the fly? Should I leave it flat? And for beginners, this can be extremely overwhelming. I used to be a little intimidated by EQ as well, so I'd really like to do a quick rundown of what EQ is and how you can use it with confidence as a music listener, no matter what device or audio setup that you have. So you're probably not a production engineer, so I'm not going to get too into the science of EQ, but I will give you a pretty good functional understanding. So this video is going to be a very basic, gentle introduction. Nothing too technical here. If you're an audiophile, this is probably a little bit below your level, but this video should be valuable even if you're listening to music on your phone speakers, which is not something I'd usually recommend, but if that's what you got, let's make it sound as good as possible. But first, let's look at what EQ or equalization actually is. So it's a little less intimidating. And really what it is just an upgrade on your already comfy volume knob or volume rocker on the side of your phone, but it lets you be more specific. So instead of raising the volume of the entire track, you can choose which sections of the sound spectrum you'd like to be louder and which sections you'd want to be quieter. And that's it, really. It's a very simple idea. And don't be worried about the term sound spectrum. It's just the range of frequencies that can exist within a piece of audio, with higher sounds on the right and lower sounds on the left, with your typical graphic EQ that comes with most devices. They all really serve the same purpose. Now, knowing this is great, but it really doesn't help you know what to do with it. Now, a lot of audiophiles would say, don't touch it. You're probably just gonna mess it up. Leave it flat. That's how it was intended to be listened to. I used to think like this a little bit. Now, if you have a sound system that corrects for the room that it's in, or really good in-ear monitors, or upmarket headphones maybe, I would say sure, leave it flat. It's probably gonna sound pretty great anyway. The thing is, not everybody has or can afford that kind of equipment, but in my mind, everybody deserves to have the best listening experience possible. And I find that it's these low-cost setups that can really benefit the most from a little bit of tweaking. And if you find that a small change makes it sound better to you, that's really what matters, right? So here's the thing. I don't know what type of music equipment that you have, but what I do have is an approach. Firstly, and I can't stress this enough, forget about the presets based on genre. Sometimes there's presets for small speakers or spoken word, and those might have an application, but your dance music isn't all of a sudden going to blow you away when you have it on the dance preset. I think it's a lot better to set your EQ for your equipment and your space. So I really don't know why they keep doing that. Most people listen to more than one genre, and like nobody's going back and forth changing their EQ for every song. At least I don't think so. But here's the deal. You're going to have to spend a little bit of time poking around in your EQ settings and training your ear a little bit. Find out what these sound spectrum frequency concentrations sound like through your particular system. Try raising only the high end, try raising only the low end, try raising the mids and dropping both the high and the low. And when you make these changes, does it sometimes become boomy or tinny? Or maybe it's a little muddy. Maybe the vocalist is getting lost when you make some changes. Now, these giant changes are not how you're gonna end up setting your EQ. Generally, dramatic shifts should be avoided, but it's a great way to get comfy with the sound spectrum and how different parts of it sound through your setup. Also, big warning when doing this, do not have your master volume control turned all the way up. I don't want you blowing anything, including your eardrums, so adjust responsibly. Once you've trained your ear a little bit and you can hear what's going on with these changes, let's dive into how to fix your EQ. One of the most common issues that can be improved by tweaking your EQ is if you're listening to music through your computer or your phone. Firstly, these little tiny speakers are usually not able to produce a quality low end, and sometimes they can't really do a sub bass kind of sound at all. Really clips off a lot of the low end. Now, if you're listening to music in this way, unfortunately, you are missing out on part of the music. There's not much that can be done about that. But you might be able to add a little bit of clarity and separation to the vocals and shave off some of that tinny, grating high end. For me, this is the preferable EQ setup for my laptop. I use a program called EQ Mac. It's free. I'm sure there's free ones for Linux and Windows. Any EQ management software should be able to make these changes. You can even do this within Spotify if you'd like, although they have a very simplified little EQ. What I do is I cut away some of this unnecessary low end that the speakers can't really produce anyway, and then I'll add a little boost around 2 to 4K hertz. And this is generally where upper range vocals live, or a guitar solo, or something like that, some melody defining feature. And hertz are just cycles per second. We are talking about sound waves after all. And don't be intimidated by the little Ks that you see on the right hand side. That's just what we use when we're talking about thousands of cycles per second. The more cycles per second, the higher the frequency. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch that you hear with your ears. So I promised I wouldn't get too sciencey, and I don't think that's too much for you guys. You got it. Now, there's no need to go crazy here. Just nice little adjustments, maybe 2 to 5 decibels max. I did drop the low end quite a bit because I am just kind of getting rid of most of it there. But we don't want too much clipping or distortion, so just nice little moves. Again, really focus on the sound and just make little tweaks until it sounds right to you. That kind of is what setting your EQ is all about. Does it sound good to you? And of course, when setting your EQ, I would recommend using a professionally produced piece of music, something that you know but you're not overly familiar with, because you may have listened to, I don't know, Hotel California on your parents' car radio, and the way it sounded through that car radio is how it should sound in your mind. So maybe pick a song from a band that you are familiar with, but you're not so familiar with the song itself, if that makes any sense. Just make sure that you're listening to the same part of the song anytime you make an adjustment. Now let's start here with headphones, because with headphones you're kind of directly placed on this virtual sound stage, but you still might want to make some slight adjustments to compensate for some frequency biases or just quirks of the headphones that you have. Maybe the high end isn't as strong as you'd like it to be, or the vocals are too quiet. Now there's a certain brand of headphones that's very trendy. I don't want to explicitly dunk on them. You know, they come in a lot of different colors. Were created by a major figure in hip hop. You know the ones that I'm talking about, I think. In my opinion, they have a slight bias in how the sound is created that leads to a louder than necessary low mid. And that's just the lower end of the middle section of the sound spectrum, this part. And this can make the whole sound a little bit muddy. Now, this is a pretty common problem with headphones that are just kind of above budget level. And on your device's graphic EQ, just a little dip around 150 to 350 hertz should clean this up a little bit, but play around with it. Your headphones are going to be different. Your ears are different. Also, just to reiterate, I would play the same 30 seconds or so of a song so you can notice those subtle changes, because they are really subtle changes, and it does take a while for your ears to kind of tune into them. And you want some sort of standardization, because different areas of the song are going to have different collections of frequency concentrations. So a bass solo is not really the best place to, you know, adjust your high end. So I would recommend dropping the needle literally or metaphorically before a chorus or something like that. But when you're at home listening through speakers, things can change a bit. So instead of being in this virtual soundstage, that stage is now the room you're in. Speaker placement is also really important, as is where the listener or listeners are placed within the room. But speaker placement is its own world. Maybe that'll be another video. Assuming your speakers are relatively well placed, there are two main things that you should be focused on when adjusting your EQ for your room. First of all, you have to consider your limitations. I live in an apartment in the city, and although the sound isolation is pretty good between units, I'm still considerate about how my neighbors might feel about, you know, boosting the bass. And low frequencies are really good at getting through walls and floors and cars. So this is not in search of perfection. This is just not being a jerk. If you're in a similar situation and you have this really great sound system, just be nice with it, I guess. Secondly, you might want to make some adjustments based on the acoustic environment of your room itself. And this is often a little bit of a hunt for nasty sounding frequencies. Or maybe they resonate too much in your space, so you get this boomy sound somewhere along the sound spectrum. But if you can't tell that there's a problem, I would leave it flat. Again, you can play around in the 2 to 4K hertz zone if you want to add a little bit of melodic clarity, but this is where you discover your real EQ powers. It's going to take some time and you're not going to be good at it at first, but that's totally okay. It's part of the process. Also, the louder the music that you're listening to, the more the shape and size of your room will come into play when it comes to EQ. And if you're really curious about acoustics, it's a really fascinating rabbit hole to go down. It's a little beyond the scope of this video, but it's a really great next step if EQ has already gotten its hooks into you. And if you find yourself moving a box of tissues to improve your sound, you're probably in a little too deep. There is software out there that can do all of this for you and in a much more accurate way, but it's usually pretty pricey. The first thing that comes to mind for me is SonarWorks, which is really great. It's good if you're on the other side of EQ, the music production side, but it's also really good if you are a music listener and you're trying to calibrate your speakers. But unless you're really an audiophile and your ear is super trained to EQ, I wouldn't really bother. I don't think it's necessary, especially if you're listening through your phone speakers. It's kind of like putting lipstick on a pig, which is mean. Also, I have to say this, be really careful with volume. Hearing damage is no joke. I have mild tinnitus from performing and listening to music way too loud when I was younger, and it's not fun. So try and avoid that and be responsible with the level of volume you're listening at. Firstly, EQ is just your volume knob that's been sliced up into different sections of the sound spectrum. Secondly, for most people's listening needs, you don't need an incredible amount of knowledge to set your EQ yourself. You can't learn anything if you're too intimidated to jump in. Thirdly, don't change anything if you can't hear anything. Maybe your ear just needs a little bit more training. And lastly, only make small adjustments. Big adjustments can lead to distortion and clipping, and you don't want that stuff in your listening experience. Be conservative with it, and as I mentioned, always reduce before you boost. Anyway, I hope that was useful for you, if even just in a small way. If you liked it, please consider dropping a like, and please consider subscribing if you're interested in music, genre, the psychology of music, or videos like this. That's all for today. Stay curious, keep listening, and I'll see you next time.